Good afternoon, everyone. Díomh gach duine agus fáilte romh ar ais chuig an sreacht garma What It Takes. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the UCD What It Takes Employability Series. My name is Michael and I'm part of the Alumni Relations team here at UCD. This is the final episode of our Autumn 2021 series, and it's going to be focusing on what it takes to network like a pro. So we're going to be hearing from two amazing UCD alumni today. I'm really excited for this webinar this afternoon. First of all, we'll be hearing from alumnus Martin Russell from the Networking Institute. And then we'll also hear from Siobhán McKenna, an alumna who is Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the Public Appointments Service. Afterwards, we'll have about 15 minutes for audience questions led by my colleague, Michelle Cohen, who is a careers consultant here with UCD's Career Network. So be sure to drop any questions you have for our panelists throughout this webinar, and we'll do our best to answer as many of them as we can near the end of this hour. Finally, this session is being recorded, so if you want to revisit it or if you have any trouble with connectivity at any point throughout this, you can find it on our UCD Alumni YouTube channel starting tomorrow. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass you off now to our first speaker, Dr. Martin Russell.
Hi folks, first of all, thank you Michael, Ria, all the team for putting it together. You know, when we were preparing this session, one of the things I said to Siobhán when we both began to realize that we had emigrated at one point of our lives was that when Irish people emigrated, they got a nickname, and the nickname was Mike and the Mix. So what was really interesting was that when people realized that when you give an Irish person a microphone, quite often you'd never get it back. So there was a saying called never give a Mick a mic. So Michael, after about 10 minutes, just wave a hand, a virtual pen, and I'll hand over to Siobhán. But what I want to talk about for the next maybe 10 minutes is just to give not just some tips on how to network, and particularly how to network like a pro, but also probe a little bit at, you know, why is networking important now? And most importantly, what is it and what is it not? And then begin to unpack how do we do this a bit more constructively. So when people say to me, Martin, why should I network? I usually say to them three things. Research has proven that if you build strong and diverse networks, you tend to be healthier, wealthier, and happier. Now, for me, they sound like three really good things. The second thing I say to them is that, believe it or not, one phone call or one conversation or one introduction can change your life. And if you want a personal story of how that came to bear for me, and particularly at UCD, I remember about 12 years ago, this month actually, when I was a pretty raw PhD student, sitting at my desk, and I got a phone call from my PhD supervisor, Professor Liam Kennedy at the Clinton Institute. And he said, Martin, the phone is going to ring in the next 10 minutes. And whatever that person asked you, just say yes. So 10 minutes later, the phone rang and I said yes. The person at the other end of the call was Kingsley Aikens, who is the CEO and founder of the Networking Institute. And without question, without that introduction, without that connection, without that conversation, my career would have taken a fundamentally different projection. So I want you to think about that for a moment in the sense of how one phone call can change your life. But what's the moral of that story? Believe it or not, whether you're early career, entering your career, middle stages of your career, or in a leadership position, quite often, the only time you will find out what somebody really thinks about you in terms of the next step of your career is when you're not in the room. And that brings in two words that frighten a lot of people, having to deal with other people. And I want to come to this in a moment in the sense of what networking is and what it isn't. We all have an idea of networking, and networking, to be frank, has a horrible image. It has the image of a big conference center, breakfast event, dinner event, lunch event, where suave businessmen and businesswomen are pinging out their business cards and trying to woo the room. That is not networking. Let's debunk that to begin with. So we'll come to that in a moment. And what I mean by that sense of only finding out what other people think about you is that, believe it or not, success in your life is a game of inches. And I'm a big sports fan. For my sins, I'm a big Tottenham Hotspur fan. And we never win anything. But whenever we get a chance of winning anything, and if you think about something like a penalty shootout, or you take the last shot and it hits a bar or hits a post and it goes wide or it goes in, the margin for success is so tiny. And what networking can do for you is to align you with people that can become the tipping agents or the nudge factors to help your career progress and flourish. So let's get to the three main questions of the presentation. What is networking and what is it not? Networking can be daunting for many people, many because of that image that I talked about. People running about the place, pinging out business cards, trying to be the center of attention and everything that goes with that. But here's the mistake that a lot of people make. Networking is about giving, not getting. Networking is about building relationships, not building transactions. And the pathway to do that is through listening and being authentic. So that's the first thing I want to say to you is, if you make the decision that networking is important for you and your career, think about what it is and what it isn't. So how do you get to the stage of it being about authenticity, listening, and giving? And that's something that's really important, because the first question you have to ask yourself then, and this is a tough question to ask yourself, is what can I give? And that will vary depending on what stage of your career you're at. If you're early career, mid-career, if you're a student coming out into the world. So you have to ask yourself some really interesting internal questions to understand what you can give. But here are some practical tips to help you understand that networking journey or the networking process. It's important to ask open-ended questions. Be curious. And the great networkers in the world are curious people. And how do you do that? And one of the best pieces of advice that I personally got, it's a very simple phrase, but I think it hits the nail on the head. Be interested, not interesting. And I'll say that again. Be interested, not interesting. And if you think, for example, of many of the networking events we go to and the experience that some of us may have, a lot of people are out there networking, talking so much about themselves, but networking is never about you. It's about the other person. How do you display authenticity and begin to unpack and show to people that you care about their journey and helping them on their journey? A very simple thing to do, for example, is to remember small things about people. Where they went to school, what they're interested in, what their children are interested in, what their spouses are interested in. You're getting to know the person. You're building relationships, not transactions. When you're networking, believe it or not, asking is your greatest tool. And sometimes people think asking is a sign of vulnerability, but actually it's a sign of strength when you think about it, because it displays you know where you want to go or what you want to achieve. So get comfortable asking and practice asking. And there's different types of asks. There's ask for time, there's ask for advice, there's ask for connections, there's ask for promotions, there's ask for jobs. And there's ways in which you can build that through, and we'll come to that in a moment about how you network. And this is something that I personally worked very hard on moving forward, because the number one reason why I became an academic is because I'm an introvert. And the academic career appealed to me. It was something where I could go spend time in libraries, work on my own, do a little bit of teaching, do a little bit of exams, of course, everything like that. But it's quite an insular job. But what it also helped me to do, and when I realized about the importance of networking at a certain point in my career, it helped me become the go-to person on my topic. And I think that's critically important. We live in an age of a lot of noise, and what people think about you is incredibly important. And I'll come to that later, as I said. But one way in which you can build your authenticity and build a way in which you can build your social capital to help other people is to invest in yourself, becoming go-to person on your topic. So for me, that was diaspora engagement, about helping people that had emigrated and helping organizations and universities that wanted to engage with them. And I mentioned that word introvert earlier. And here's something really interesting about the image and application of networking. Introverts are quite often better networkers than extroverts, because they do it that deep internal thinking. They do it with authenticity. They do it with meaning. And the process that we're going to unpack next will hopefully show to anybody that's on the call that is a proud introvert, and I'm one of them, that this is something not to be scared of, but something to embrace. And what's been really interesting during the pandemic, for example, is that taking away that need for physical interaction because of rules beyond our control, introverts have actually found it more comfortable to network. And we can maybe unpack that later in a moment as well. So that's what networking is and what networking isn't. What I would say is always remember it's about giving, not getting. You give to the individual, you will get back from their network. So how to network like a pro? First of all, as I hinted at earlier, you have to make a decision that this is important for you. And what's really interesting about human beings is that we're creatures of habit. So trust me, not everybody that either you're competing with for the next job or for the career development will make the decision to make it important for them. So what I would encourage you to do is to make that decision in the affirmative, that this is important to me. So that's the first step. And then you have to be a little bit intentional. You have to have some sense of what you're trying to achieve. And that's the next step of the decision. And the question we often ask is your network strong enough to get you to where you want to be in that vision? Whether that's 3 years time, 5 years time, 10 years time, whatever it is. And for most people, the simple answer was no. For me, it was no. I'll hold my hands up. So what's the process to help you begin that journey then, to network like a pro? There's 4 steps to networking: research, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. And research is a little bit of homework about finding out who's in your network now and what gaps you have in your network to help you achieve the next steps in your career. Cultivation is listening. That's where you begin to signpost to the people that you're networking with that you are authentic. Because here's the punchline. Successful people get asked a lot, right? But they've also built up a radar for smelling insincerity. They see it a mile coming. So that cultivation phase is about having conversations, learning about people, learning their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, and how you can add to that journey for them. Solicitation is about the ask. And I know I'm moving quite quickly through this, but there's an old saying in life: if you don't ask, you don't get. But what can be happen for a lot of people as well is that they feel like they have to be the one asking on their behalf all the time. And that's not true. Other people can ask for you or on your behalf. And we'll come to that in a moment around the role of mentors and sponsors. And solicitation, the final step, is how you signpost people that are building relationships rather than transactions. Because if people ask and people get and they drop you, that's where the insincerity lies. So stewardship is actually about saying thank you and well done in meaningful ways. And you can only do that if you've done the other steps professionally and with authenticity. So how do you begin? And I know this might sound really complex or abstract to people. How do you begin? Believe it or not, you begin with lists. Networking is the business of lists. So the first step, when you begin to look at your network, I guarantee you, you'll see that the bulk of your network are people just like you. And shake loose of that. Because here's something that's really interesting to remember. We're not wired to talk to people that are different to us. And this is why I'm such a huge fan of what Siobhán is doing in her career and her work. Think about it. When you're a kid, when you're 4 or 5, one of the first things that your parents tell you is don't talk to strangers. But yet here I am saying you need to build a diverse network, strong and weak connections. So you have to get comfortable talking to strangers. So do that little piece of your network and you'll understand from what you want to achieve that there's gaps, and the bulk of your network will be people just like you. And that's fine to a degree, but you need to diversify it. And you need to try to categorize your network a little bit. And there's 4 categories to your network. You have a contact, a connect, a relationship, and a friend. And a contact is somebody, for example, that you've met at a conference and for the life of you, you can't remember who they are, but you have some reason, you have some contact with them. A connection is a little bit deeper. Somebody that has really got to know you a bit, you, them a bit, and you understand what they do. Relationship is very deep and friend is deeper. And between the first 2 and the second 2, there's an imaginary line. And that line is called trust. When people get to the relationship and friend category, that's where trust is active. So your job as a networker is to bring people on a journey that they want to be in that relationship and friend with you. And there's an old saying about dating which might apply here. The end game of a first date is to get a second. So when you think about how you bring people on the journey for your journey and their journey, The only way they move down that list to relationship or friend is that sense of mutuality, of respect, of purpose, authenticity. That's how you move them down. So that's something to keep an eye on. 3 questions to help you get there. And 3 questions that I think you should keep in mind for every conversation that you're having in a professional capacity with your networking hat on. The first question is, what can I do for you? Incredibly powerful and meaningful question. And whatever the person says back to you, you have to act on it. So this comes back to the first point I made about internally asking yourself, what can I offer? What can I bring to the table? And some of that doesn't have to be talent. It doesn't have to be skills. It can be you and your connections. We can come to that maybe in the Q&A. So what can I do for you? The second question is, if you were me, what would you do? It shows respect and it defers to their authority. Very powerful question. And the third question is, who do you know who? So just say hypothetically, you want to work in the aeronautical industry in country X, Y, and Z. Who do you know who works in company X, Y, Z that has an office in country X, Y, Z? So you're giving to the individual and getting back from the network. So I just wanted to keep those 3 questions out there. The final section, because I'm conscious of time and to get into Q&A. Believe it or not, and this sounds a little bit clinical, we all have personal brands. And I'm not a big fan of the term, but it's true, right? So that idea of what people think about you and how can you build career capital through your personal brand? Whether you like it or not, you have to be in control of that personal brand. So things like how you use LinkedIn, the type of knowledge you're sharing, the type of connections you're making, all that type of stuff matters in your personal brand. So you have to make a decision to invest in it, and you almost become your own personal CEO of that brand. And particularly with the pandemic, with the shift to online, it's important that that is high tech and high touch. And we can give some examples of that in Q&A. But where I learned the importance of this, again, was as that somebody that was an academic and comfortable in their own shoes, realizing that the next step of my career will depend on other people and moving not just in through universities, but working in collaboration with them outside universities, I knew I was going to need the help of other people to get there. And 2 people whose reading and writing informed greatly for me was a chap by the name of Harvey Coleman, who talked about this idea of career progression in the pie theory: performance, image, and exposure. And performance actually equates to only about 10% of how people view you. Because here's the punchline: doing a good job is the minimum. So you think about the advice we got growing up. You go into that company, keep your head down, do a good job, and you'll go up the ladder. Those days are done. When you look at trends around the future of work and employability, something really needs to look there. So he copped this and he said, performance is 10%. 30% is exposure. Who knows about you? So this is the personal brand piece. And the biggest piece, 30% is image, personal brand, who knows you. And the largest chunk is exposure, which is 60%. And that essentially means who has seen you in action and who has seen you as a future leader or a future influencer or whatever it is within the industry that you're working in. And how do you get there? And this is my final point to close. And this came from the work of Carla Harris, and we can share a link to her TED Talk. And what we'll also do at the end is share 50 free tips on networking for everybody in attendance. Carla Harris argued that you need 2 types of currency in your career. You needed performance currency and you needed relationship currency. So performance currency is what I talk about in terms of performance, doing a good job, being great at what you do. But she said relationship currency is about the people who can help you get ahead in your career and building the connections with them. And she broke it down into 2 key areas. She said you need mentors and you need sponsors. But she made a very important distinction. She said a mentor is a good to have, a sponsor is a must have. And a mentor, believe it or not, and I've been on both ends of the spectrum in terms of being a mentor and having mentors. I think like many people on the call, a mentor's job is to talk to you, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But a sponsor's job is to talk about you when you're not in the room. Who's going to, as she says, bang the table on your behalf when decisions are being made about your career? So I'll close with the question of, do you have your mentors and do you have your sponsors? And maybe we can unpack that in the Q&A. So Siobhán, I'll hand over to you. I think I kept on time just about. and we can go from there.
Great. Great. Thanks very much for that, Martin. Incredibly insightful. I knew it would be, and you didn't disappoint. So many thanks for that. And also my thanks to Ria and Michelle and Neve and Michael and everybody at UCD alumni for inviting me back to this event. My first instinct when Ria contacted me to see if I'd be interested in this panel was to say no, thanks. Networking, yuck, I hate it. I certainly never consider myself a pro, particularly when I'm sharing a platform with someone like Martin, who is actually a pro. But here we are. And so just before I talk a bit about my experiences or what I've learned about networking, I just thought I'd give you a bit of my background. So I graduated from UCD with an international social science degree in 1997. That international part was from my Erasmus year in Amsterdam. When I graduated, I took off like many Irish students do and traveled around the place and worked in various parts of the world, Australia, North America, Asia, places like that. I came back from my travels to do a stage or an internship at the European Commission in 1999. And that was a fantastic experience. And if we're talking about networks, there was a network of 600 young European professionals for 6 months in Brussels working and partying together. And I still draw heavily on that network, believe me. When I came back to Dublin after that, and I did a master's in ethnic and racial studies in our other hallowed third level institution, Trinity College. And then I hightailed it out of here to London, where I spent the next 20 years working in the third sector, non-profit, and the public sector. My first role in London was with George Soros's Open Society Institute. I was a policy officer there, and I focused on the global fight against HIV and AIDS. I was there for about 4 or 5 years, and then I took a break from it, and I went and I volunteered overseas at an orphanage in Kathmandu, just to see if international development was really for me, and it wasn't. So I returned to London. I got a temp job in the Department of Education, which led to the last position that I had before I moved back to Dublin this summer with my family, and that was City Hall, working for the Mayor of London. I held various roles in City Hall. The first 5 or 6 years, I worked on education and youth programs for disadvantaged Londoners. I was also a senior social policy advisor to the Mayor and his deputies. And at that point, we had transitioned from Boris Johnson to Sadiq Khan. That was great. And then my final role was as a senior program manager in the newly established and the first of its kind violence reduction unit, which was also under the Mayor's remit as well. And in that, I was the education program manager there, and we worked to tackle youth violence and knife crime on the streets of London. It was a pretty full-on job. And that brings me up to last year and this year, where my husband and I decided that we'd had enough of Brexit, and my former boss, and we decided to bring our young family home back to Dublin, which was looking much more progressive and open and inclusive than the UK was. And that is a sentence that I never really thought that I would say out loud. But it just goes to show you never know how things can change. And so to networking, I suppose I've been mulling it over since Ria convinced me to come on this panel. And as I said at the outset, I've always hated networking. Thought just made my blood run cold. And you put breakfast in front of it and I'll just run a mile from it. But what I have learned over the last 20 years is that, firstly, I didn't really understand what networking was. Martin has spelled it out clearly. It took me 20 years to figure that out for myself, I suppose. But it's also one of the best skills that you can learn early on in your career, because whatever sector, whatever business, whatever job you're in, and Martin alluded to this, you are in the business of people. You can't get anything done without your colleagues, your bosses, your clients, your all of that kind of stuff. So networking is really about building those human relationships in order to get things done, in order to further your career. And so I think kind of when the penny dropped around that, I actually realized I was reasonably good at it, and I had networks all over the place. And when people say you've got to leverage your network and get out there and stuff, it sounds really Machiavellian. And Martin reinforced the point a couple of times, and I'm going to say it again. It's about what you give. And what you give, you will get back tenfold from your network. So it's not about walking up to someone and going, "Hi, I need a job. Can you give me one?" As Martin said, it's about connecting with someone, asking them about themselves and their interests and their careers and what they've learned. And I've never met a senior manager who isn't happy to share what they've learned along the way, and talk about their successes and things like that. So once I kind of got over that, where you're not actually going cold to someone to ask them for a job, it becomes a lot more just about building those relationships. It's like everything else in life, the more you give, the more you get. Martin also alluded to the fact that your networks will be much more robust if you are authentic and they're genuine relationships. People, as Martin said, not just successful people, but I think a lot of people can smell inauthenticity a mile away. They can smell people who are just in it for themselves, and who you'll never hear again once you help them out. And that is not a way to build a network, it's a way to burn a network. And so, I would always ask people what I could do for them, or if I can help them, or if there's, anything that I can do for them before I kind of ask them for advice or guidance, or to connect me to somebody else in their organization because I'm interested in working in it. As I said, I've never asked for a job directly. I have stood up at the end of a meeting or at the end of an email exchange, and said that one day I'm going to work for your organization because I really like what you do. And so that, I think that is a better way of kind of planting that seed with people if you are keen to work with them at some future points. As I have said, I've moved around a bit and I've got networks everywhere, and it's never been easier to stay in touch with them. And my network is a global network because I have friends and family all around the world. I've worked in international organizations, and we live in a village. It's a global village, and digital and tech has really made it incredibly easy just to stay in touch with people. There is something to be said about maintaining those networks, although I will say that I have had dormant networks and dormant contacts that I haven't really seen from one end of a decade to another. But because the relationship I have with them was real and meaningful and authentic, I can pop up after 10 years and go, "Hey, a friend of mine wants to get into risk analysis, and I can see that you're in risk analysis. I know we haven't spoken in a while, but can I put her in touch with you?" or something like that. So I guess the foundations that you put around your networks early on will dictate how that network then grows and blossoms. Martin said it as well, and it's in my job title. I am all about diversity, but there is something about diversifying your networks and diversifying your events. This is Exhibit A for me. I'm here, I'm well out of my comfort zone, but I'm told it's healthy. But I've also met 4 or 5 people, including Martin and Rhea and stuff, as we prepped for this session. And I'll be adding them immediately to my network afterwards. So there is a lot to be said for putting your hand up, doing those jobs or those roles or those tasks that other people don't want to do, getting involved in an event or charities and things like that, that is really not your bag, but you never know where it will take you and who you will meet. That is a lesson, I think, in general for life. There's also something around, I was thinking, a lot of my professional and personal networks are blurred into each other. And Martin alluded to it in the last 2 stages of those 4 stages of networking, where you become friends and you have relationships with people. You will make friends in the workplace, and some of them will be lifelong friends, and you will move on and they will move on. But you will have very good friends in an industry that you're interested in or were interested in. So there can be kind of that blurring of lines. I mean, the reason I came home to the job that I am in now is because a friend of mine who I studied with in the University of Amsterdam, we were in politics together in UCD. Don't underestimate your UCD connections. I hadn't spoken to him for about 10 years. And then over the last decade, there was a few emails back and forth, and he's on Facebook and LinkedIn, we kind of reconnected. And then he very randomly saw this job this time last year, sent it to me, said, "I know you're thinking of coming home, thought you might be interested in this. They probably don't pay enough, but go for it anyway." And here I am a year later at home because he somebody I met 25 years ago in college, I'd stayed in contact with. was out there working for me as well, and keeping an eye out for things. So you just never know where somebody out there, a friend or a professional, is, as Martin said, is going to make that call or going to send that email that's going to completely change the direction that you're going in. Again, just from my bio, you can see that I've spent quite a bit of time in different countries. I've had to start networks from scratch, or from one or two people. It's hard work, but it is very rewarding, and it often doesn't yield results immediately, but it will do in time. When I moved to London 20 years ago, I slept on the sofas and floors of friends and professional friends that had been in Brussels with me during the commission. Few of them were in London, and my first month was sofa surfing until I found somewhere to live, and one of them gave me a temp job, and again, so I hadn't seen them for a few years, but they were quite happy to open their doors again because the relationship I had with them was genuine. When I went to Australia traveling, I slept on the floor of I slept in the spare room of a friend of mine who'd been from the University of Melbourne 25 years, it's 25 years later now, but he'd been at the University of Melbourne, had transferred to the University of Amsterdam. I met him there. I turned up in Australia 2 years later and said, can I sleep on your floor for a few weeks till I find somewhere to live? My job in the Open Society Institute, my very first one, again, was from a friend that I had met during my Brussels days, who worked in international development, had come across the Open Society Institute, had seen the job for executive assistant policy officer advertised and sent it to me, told me she thought it'd be a good fit, I should apply. And I spent the next 5 years working in that organization. I had never heard of the Open Society Institute until that friend sent me information about it. So you just never know where these things are going to crop up. And just a note of caution, I think because of the way tech and digital are moving, it's very easy to kind of end up in WhatsApp groups that are substitute for networks, or LinkedIn groups, things like that are fine for information and for connecting. But there is a kind of a disconnect there sometimes, I think, when you don't have that depth of connection that Martin was talking about. I've also exited networks that were toxic. Just before I left London, I somehow ended up in a Goldman Sachs traders network. And that environment, I suppose the best way to say is that it leaned heavily towards the toxic. The person who brought me into the network was a mixed race Irish guy, and he mentored young Black and mixed race guys in Goldman Sachs as they came in entry level, and supported them on their journey and their career through Goldman Sachs. So, and he wanted me to come and talk to the group, and that's fine. But I very quickly realized that I didn't know what non-fungible tokens are. I referred to Bitcoin as magic beans, except this was not a network that I was going to bring anything to, or I felt that really was going to enhance my wider network. So I exited from that group, and I'm pretty sure they don't miss me. But all I'm saying is that you can find yourself in those kind of networks that are not positive or beneficial in this digital age. So just a note of caution about that. Also, don't be afraid to set up your own networks in your workplace. In City Hall, I set up an EU staff network to get us all through Brexit about a year ago, or a year before Brexit happened. There was about 70 or 80 EU staff members there. I knew there was other Europeans in the building. I didn't know how many. I didn't know what their views on Brexit were. I didn't know any of that. But I decided that since our rights were being trampled all over the place, that we needed to gather and collect and speak with one voice. And so we did. But I ended up with a network of 70 EU Brits who were all across London working in the same building as me. And, it was a support network. There was no doubt about that. But also, it's a professional network. There are also people who work in the public sector and things like that as well. I also set up a Black and ethnic minority staff network out there. I don't know if there are people of colour on this call. I hope there are. Never underestimate the power of those kinds of networks as well. We know that discrimination and inequality happens in the workplace. Your best defense about that is to join a staff network or union or something like that. And again, you will make lifelong connections. You will make connections that will help further your career. You will make connections where you can help other people further their career. I ran a couple of lean-in circles as well out of that. Sheryl Sandberg's lean-in book, and that was 2 groups of 10 or 12 women in each. There is another network, Instant Network. Most of us have now left City Hall and moved on, etc., etc. But we still have a little Lean In City Hall network group, and we ping things back and forth, and we check in with each other and see how they are. We're all over the place now. So all I'm saying is be proactive. If there isn't that kind of network around your place of work, by all means, go ahead and set it up. I think like the last 18 or 20 months, platforms like LinkedIn and things like that have really come into their own. I've recently seen the power of those kind of platforms to reach wider audiences. I had a post on the hashtag "This Little Girl Is Me" and just about growing up in Ireland, etc., etc. And 1.8 million people have seen it. Thousands of people contacted me. Hundreds of people emailed me directly. I have hundreds of new contacts, most of which I will never have anything to do with going forward. They're all around the world. They just reached out because they were, I connected through that post with them. But what it has done is, well, in one way, it's messed up my LinkedIn feed, because I've got feeds coming in from all sorts of sectors and careers and stuff that I know nothing about and have no interest in. But it's broadened it, you know, and I can see that and I can recognize it, and it's much more diverse. And it's just, again, it's that the power of those platforms. We've all been stuck in our bedrooms or living rooms for the last 18 months. And so I think those kind of platforms have taken off. So don't underestimate the power of that. And again, as Martin was saying, watch your brands on those kind of things. Employers increasingly these days are checking social media, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff. So just watch yourself there. And just, I was really delighted to hear Martin talk about sponsorship in the workplace. I'm a big fan of mentoring. I've mentored people through my career. I've been mentored as well. It's great if you can have more than one mentor, it's even better. But I also have realized the power of sponsorship. And in City Hall, one of the last things I did as gender equality lead was to set up a sponsoring program for women in City Hall. Our gender pay gap is at about 11%. And we needed to take positive action to reduce those pay gaps. And one of the things we did was to set up a sponsoring program. So I have looked into the power of sponsorship. And I first came across an article in the Harvard Business Review, which talked about how women in particular were over-mentored and under-sponsored. Because sponsorship, as Martin was saying, is all about power. It's the power of your sponsor to leverage their own network, to be your brand ambassador. The mentoring is more about the inward work. Sponsoring is much more outward focused. You need both, but you need sponsorship if you're going to get on. And you know, they've done reports and crunched the numbers on it, and they know what they refer to as the sponsoring effect. It's very high for people of color, high for women as well, and it's also considerable for men in the workplace as well, with the figures kind of around 23%, 17 and 11 there. And what that means is a person of color is 23% more likely to ask for a pay rise, more likely to ask for the tough jobs or the high visible assignments, things like that, if they have a sponsor. 17% for women and 11% for men. So get yourself sponsors and get yourself mentors. And so that's really, I'm looking at the clock ticking down here, and there's lots of questions coming in. So I'm going to just slightly recap there. Learn how to network in your own way early in your career. It's an essential skill. Give more than you get. Be real and authentic, and your networks will last a long time and bear serious fruit. Never ask for a job directly. Stay in touch. It's never been easier. Diversify. Go to things that are a bit outside of your wheelhouse or your area of expertise, or just that you wouldn't dream of going to generally, and see who you meet there. Networks can be personal, professional. They'll blur and they'll change over time. Don't be afraid to be proactive and set up your own networks and get yourself a mentor and a sponsor. And that's it for me there. Hope that was useful. Michelle is now gonna come in and help us field the questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Siobhán and Martin. I've been here taking lots and lots of notes, but there was something really reassuring, I think, to hear from both of you about networking and taking that fear. Sometimes we work with students and the idea of networking, they recoil, the idea of talking to strangers. you know, about careers and things like that. Whereas you're flipping it and talking more about like giving, how can you help? So something very reassuring about the way both of you spoke about it. And we have some questions. So Siobhán, you're just finished, so I'll give you a chance to grab a glass of water. And Martin, there is a question for you. Brian was very interested in what you mentioned about mentoring and sponsorship. I'm wondering, could you expand a little bit on that?
Well, of course, look, and I think Siobhán's story kind of hit the nail on the head in many ways, you know, in the sense of the slight difference between the two. You know, and believe it or not, look, a mentor is incredibly important for, as Siobhán said, for your own personal development. You know, they have to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. And trust me, as somebody that has mentors that have done that for me, it's incredibly important. You know, look, trust me, I'm a working class kid from Cork that ended up in academia. You know, I wasn't the fit in many ways. I'm part of that fire had to be kind of put down now and again, you know, and mentors help you do that. But I think Siobhán hit the nail on the head when we talk about sponsors, and that's people that have probably been a little bit further down the career dial, that are willing to expend their own internal political capital on your behalf, but most importantly, they're willing to spend their reputational capital on your behalf. And, you know, that's not going to happen overnight. And when you think about, you know, doing a good job in terms of performance and everything, look, that's fine, that will get you involved, but how you actually build that connection with that person takes time. You know, trust is not an event that has to be earned, as we say. So that's the slight difference, is that it's a much more direct and actually compelling ask, I would say, of the person to say, are you willing to go into that room when it really matters? And for want of a better phrase, have my cap on your head and have my back, you know, and that's a very big ask of someone, you know, so it's important that you take the time. You don't meet someone today and you say that tomorrow. You know, that takes a bit of time to culture. But I think Siobhán's answer just gave that story to life, you know, in the sense of her own instinct. So the takeaway from the Carla Harris talk that I would talk about is that she says that the mentorship stuff is good to have, but the sponsorship is a must-have. And I think that hits the nail on the head.
Very good. Thanks, Martin. And Siobhán, you brought to life, I think, all the fantastic networks that you've established over the last number of years. And I was very interested, you mentioned you had to start from scratch in different cities. And again, there would be many people in our audience who maybe have traveled before or thinking of moving abroad now as things open up. And it might seem quite daunting to establish a new network in Toronto or Sydney or London. And would you have any tips about that, just given your own extensive experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you're going to, I mean, there's two types of immigration. There's people who want to immigrate and they want, and I did. There was no economic necessity for me to leave the country. Other people are sometimes forced, depending on where they are. Like all of my brothers in the 80s had to leave Ireland because there was no jobs for them. They've all subsequently come back, most of them. But so like I knew in my head, I knew that I would have to start from scratch. I had, you know, there was no one, like in one way Ireland is great, but in one way I desperately needed to get out of my networks in Ireland because they were so small and they were all the same. And everybody went to this school and everybody went to UCD and everybody went into banking and finance. And I was like, I need to get, and then they all started getting married. And I was like, my God, I need to get out of here. Quick smart. And, you know, as I said, I knew 2 people in London in a city of 8 million. And you never really know until you turn up on someone's doorstep, like how awful it's going to be or how great it's going to be sleeping in their spare room for a couple of weeks. But you have to force yourself to do those things that you normally, like I'm very self-reliant and normally I'd have it all organized, but sometimes you just have to rely on the kindness and help of both strangers and friends. And I spent 18 months in temp jobs. Like I'd turn up in a temp agency at 8 o'clock in the morning, like they used to do down at the docks looking for work. And by 9 o'clock, if you hadn't got it, you'd have to go home again. You'd sit around and do nothing, you know, or you sit around and send CVs out and things like that. It is a slow process. It took me 2 or 3 years to really figure out London and how the jobs market worked and what was connected to who and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I think if you are going to do that, don't expect it to happen, as Martin was saying, overnight. I have never gone somewhere where I have never known anyone. That is a very brave move. Lots of people do it, but it just takes time. But it's a journey. is what my dad is very fond of saying, you know, success is a journey, not a destination. So don't be in a rush, and it will come. And you'll go from job to job, and you'll meet people, and you connect with them, and you know, you will build it, but you do kind of have to start. And it was one of my reluctance coming back, because all of my contacts and my career had been in London for 20 years. And I was like, so when we were talking about coming home and I didn't have a job, and this was before I had this job and stuff, I was like, I can't start from scratch in my mid-40s in my career. It'll kill me. But lots of people do it. And most of people who are graduating these days will have how many jobs in how many sectors? Nobody has a job for life anymore. So that in itself, I think, will help people build networks, because they will churn through jobs and they will churn through industries, and they will pick people up as they go.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Siobhán. And Martin, I'm asking this question to you, and it's something Siobhán mentioned about exiting networks. And over the years, you're going to be members and collect lots of, I suppose, connections and be part of different networks. But your network says something about you as well, like who you're connected to. So how do you balance maybe moving in and out, maybe moving away from certain groups, saying no as you maybe develop a large group of connections and you move through your career? Would you have any kind of tips for that?
Yeah, it's you know, here's the punchline with it, you know, and trust me, I'm a boring academic behind it all. Give me a pen and paper rather than a laptop. you know, but we're surrounded now with platforms, right? And we can be connected to so many people. You can have X number of friends on one platform, you can have LinkedIn connection. You know, there's a professor at Oxford, Professor Dunbar, who said, as human beings, we can only maintain 150 relationships at any given time. So when you begin to think about, you know, how you spend your time, that's a pretty narrow window. You know, most Irish families, if you're Irish, have big families. families go into that 150. You know, you need to keep a space for the people you don't know. But what they do, I think Siobhán hinted at this, is that they become dormant connections. You know, and if you have done the networking process well enough and authentically enough with them, that re-engagement point can come at time. But, you know, you do have to manage your time, you know, and part of this is a little bit of a screening work as well, you know, because when you begin to think about this probably a bit more intentionally in terms of making the decision that networking is important to you, you understand why you're networking as well. And I think that's where maybe the Machiavellian angle comes into one, that, you know, you're thinking, what's in it for me? But you're doing it in a different way. Hopefully the argument that we're making is that we're coming at it at a different angle. So what I would say is think strategically about your time as well. You know, it doesn't have to be a breakfast get together in terms of 30 people, you know, but you can bump into somebody for coffee, breakfast, you can bump into somebody for coffee at lunch on the way home from work. So you have 3 networking opportunities a day at your disposal there. So it's about understanding what networks are important for you, where you were, where you want to go, but not just dropping them and leave and, you know, being clinical about it. What will happen is that there will become times, because the people that you leave are progressing in their career as well. And that's what's really interesting. And that dormant connection can be reactivated at a later date if you've done the first piece well enough, in the sense of engaging in the right way. But look, manage your time. You don't want to be having conversations for the sake of having conversations.
yeah, absolutely. Very good. And both of you have mentioned about, you know, it's about giving. But we have a question, you know, from someone in the audience. Can you say a little bit more about, you know, maybe understanding what it is you're giving, maybe you're either a career changer or at a very early stage in your career. It maybe comes back to understanding your own passions, interests, skills, things like that. Is there anything you would add, Siobhán, to that? Just about in terms of, okay, I'm thinking of doing an informational interview with somebody, but what do I give to that? So someone has a kind of query about that.
Yeah, sometimes it can be as simple as giving that person an ego boost. You know, somebody wants to sit down and learn from them.
Very good. Good point.
You know, and I mean, I always used to be shocked, like, you know, 10 years ago, when young ones would come up to me and go, oh my God, how did you get to the dizzying heights you did? And I'm looking at them going, seriously? But they're 10 years behind me and they haven't learned what I have. And so people will always have something to share. So, I mean, there is a bit of that. It depends how senior they are, whether it's peer or whether they're, you know, stratospherically ahead of you in their career, will depend on the approach that you take. but generally asking someone for advice and guidance and how did you start out and what have you learned along the way, instead of going, can you look at my CV and can you rewrite it for me? Because you're in the sector and you know the buzzwords and you know the this, that, and the other. Like, no one will do that cold for you. So that's what I mean. Like, it's like, I don't think I've ever asked anyone directly for anything. It's always the second or third meeting or date, as Martin was saying, where, you know, you build that relationship and they trust you and, you know, they're happy to do that small task for you. And then you can get bigger with the asks, I think.
Yeah, very good.
Michelle, can I quickly jump into that, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
I think, you know, in today's age, one of the most powerful things you can give people is your undivided attention. You know, and particularly if you're earlier in your career, that is a big question. You know, you're beginning your career, you're thinking, you know, in your own mind, it's almost like the imposter syndrome. You're a little bit novice-y in the sense of, you know, should I be in this room? You know, there's some very free things you can give to people. You know, you can give people your full attention. You can give them your humor. You can give them your expertise. You can give them an insider view on what you think is important. So that's where that sense of giving and the more, this is something I've picked up as well in business along the way. Quite often the most powerful person in the room is the quietest one.
Yeah.
So I think if you really, you know, get into that school of thought of giving people your full attention, particularly in this age where there's so many distractions, it leaves a mark on people.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm conscious of time, so maybe just one more very quick question. And this is something we get asked a lot in the Careers Network because people use LinkedIn quite a bit. But how, so you connect with someone, but how do you keep that connection active or warm in a digital sense? And we would advise maybe, you know, liking and sharing comments or articles and things of interest. Is there anything else that you yourselves personally use to stay active on kind of online social networking sites? Maybe Siobhán or Martin, I don't mind.
I was going to say, I'll let Siobhán go first because the only one I use is LinkedIn.
You only use LinkedIn, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, LinkedIn is the only one I use. I'll be honest, 20 months ago, I wouldn't, you know, it was way down on my list. It's not on my home screen. Because you're out there and you're networking with actual humans at events and in this, that, and the other. So I didn't need, and then you'd go home and find them on LinkedIn and you connect them. But you knew you'd see them at the next quarterly gathering of UCD alum in London or whatever it was. So, you know, there wasn't that. It's tougher in that way. I think now, but it is that interaction with them, and or, you know, and kind of the little sidebar message, oh, I really like the post on X, Y, and Z that you put. It doesn't always have to be public.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing, just to remind them, I suppose, that you're there still.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. Well, I'm conscious that Michael will be rejoining us. I know he has, just to close off and to share I suppose some articles of interest and things like that. But thanks very much, both Siobhán and Martin. I think you actually covered so much in the session that I think we're all walking away with lots of hints and tips around networking, and certainly a lot of reassurance around it. So thank you both for that.
No problem.
Thank you.
Hi there. Yeah, I completely agree with Michelle. Thank you so much, Siobhán and Martin, for your fantastic insights there and tips. That was absolutely brilliant. And thank you as well to Michelle for moderating that and feeding all the questions to our panelists. That was really excellent. And I'd just like to remind everyone that if you're a student or if you've graduated from UCD in the past 2 years, you can take advantage of the many events and consultant advice from the Careers Network here in UCD. So make sure to avail of that. And thanks again, Michelle. And thank you to all of you who tuned in this afternoon. We really appreciate your comments, your chat, your questions, and your engagement throughout this webinar. We'd encourage you to connect with Martin and Siobhán on LinkedIn after this session and practice that outreach with the pros. We'll be posting links to their profiles in the chat now as well. You can also find numerous resources, including links that we were sharing throughout this webinar, over at the What It Takes Resources Hub on the UCD Alumni Network. And the link for that will be in the chat. And indeed, that Alumni Network is another excellent resource for networking and other opportunities such as that. So keep that in mind too. Just a few final notes on some upcoming events before we close for the afternoon. Like I said at the start, this is our last What It Takes webinar for 2021, but don't worry, We'll be back in the new year with some more excellent speakers. In the lead up to UCD Women in Leadership, we will be doing 2 episodes of What It Takes, including a webinar on what it takes to kick imposter syndrome, which is a term that Martin mentioned just during the Q&A a moment ago, and also what it takes to be a successful returner. So both of those topics will be of great interest, I'd imagine, to this audience. So anyone who has attended today, you will be emailed an invite to those closer to the date. Finally, this series aims to support our UCD community with career development opportunities, but I'd also like to mention our commitment to supporting students through the COVID crisis. Generous funds have been raised thanks to alumni and friends of UCD just like you. So if you would like to support our efforts to provide urgent financial and mental health support to those students who need it the most, you can visit the link that will be posted into the chat. So that's everything from us. Thank you again so much to our panelists, to Michelle, to Ria and Neve, and for you for joining us this afternoon. And we hope to see you again real soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.